Sahana vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryankaravavahai, Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, yeah, I'm not even going to keep track of what session we are at. I think this is like number 33, 34, something like that. It's close to the end of the Gita Dhyana Shlokams. And Nikita, if you want to take a shot at reading, I'm going to share my screen. 1 minute. Um, okay. Is the screen too? Should I zoom in?
You could zoom, yeah,
Yeah.
zoom in a little bit.
So last time we went over we talked about prayer in great detail. And
Hmm.
today, we'll look at Shloka 9 of the Gita Dhyana Shloka. So I'm just going to read it out, and then Nikita, you can read the explanation. Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutaha Sunvanti Divyaistaved Vedai Sanga Padakramo Parishadair Gayanti Yam Samagaha ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुः सुरासुरगण देवाय तस्मै नमः. Read this.
Yeah. To the Lord about whom Brahma, Varuna, Indra, Rudra, and the Marut Devatas praise with divine hymns, the one whom the singers of the Samaveda praise by singing with a full complement of the limbs of singing, in the order of Pada and Krama and the Upanishads, the one whom contemplative people see with minds resolved in him in a state of meditation, whose nature the celestials and demons do not know. Unto him, the Lord, my salutations. The word deva has different meanings. The root meaning is that which is effulgent. Deva can refer to any god, a celestial, or even a sense organ. The Lord is also called Deva, meaning the one who is all knowing. Unto this Lord my salutations.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm just trying to push this up on the screen. Okay.
Right. Praised by exalted beings. Who is this Lord? He is the one about whom all the gods, from Brahmaji downward, sing hymns of praise. In addition to Brahmaji, the verse specifically mentions the Devas, Varuna, Indra, Rudra, and the Marut Devatas. Even though these Devas are exalted beings, they are still Jivas, individuals occupying special positions. Their songs in praise of Ishvara are found in the Vedas.
I'll just give a little, because we've not touched upon this topic about the devas. Are you familiar with the devas? Anybody? When we say the word deva as, Indra, Rudra, Varuna, you're familiar, right? Okay. So just in case, for folks who aren't, Ishvara, there is only Ishvara. There's nothing other than Ishvara. But the devas are all, you can say, different um, aspects of Ishvara with a certain control over the natural order. So they've been, when you speak of Varuna, you refer to as typically the deva of the ocean, the lord of water, the waters. But water doesn't just mean the H2O compound, the molecule water. But water is, any form of fluidity, liquidity that is there in the cosmos, because this kind of property really pervades everything. So it's more of a property. Likewise, the Maruta Devatas, you might have heard the word Maruti, the car. It's named after Hanuman. So Maruti is Maruta Devta is essentially Vayu. And so Hanumanji is an incarnation of Vayu Devta. And that is what the Devta refers to. And so again, this Vayu doesn't refer just to the air we breathe, but it is a certain, again, natural property, a natural order of the cosmos where you have particulate substance in the form of, you know, gaseous compounds, and just the property of, gas being able to fill and pervade everything. So these are all different properties, and these are all different laws of nature. And they, just as you have in a certain government, you have prime ministers and cabinet ministers and whatnot. That way, you have these administrative, natural forces in the cosmos, and Ishvara is manifesting in the form of these different natural forces, and also the administrative officials of these natural forces. So the devas are both the forces, the natural forces, the natural order, as well as the governing, presiding deities of those particular particulates of the order. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. You can continue.
Praised by scholars. Those who are able to sing the Sam Veda also praise the Lord. To sing the to sing the Vedas, one must have the knowledge to do so. Six other disciplines of knowledge are required. They are called the sadangas, the six limbs. They are
Shadangas.
shar- sharangas, the six limbs. They are phonetics, shiksha, grammar, vyak, vyakarana, rituals, kalpa, etymology, nirukta, prosody, chandas, and astronomy with astrology, Jyotish. The reciters of the Samveda with the full knowledge of these six limbs sing in praise of the Lord the hymns of Samveda in the form of pada and krama, along with the Upanishads which reveal the truth of the Lord.
Does this make sense? What you just read overall? Okay, I'm not an expert in this particular bit, but I can explain a little bit. So you have the Vedas, and you also have the Vedangas. The Vedangas are particular bodies of knowledge, disciplines that one requires in order to be successful at studying and teaching the Vedas when it comes to the chanting portion of the Vedas. So typically, not typically, the Vedas are chanted, and you have four Vedas: Rig, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva. And so Yajur, no, Rig, Yajur, and Atharva Veda have three different um, frequencies, three different notes. So you have Uddata, Anudatta, and something called Dirgha Swarita. And you have a flat note and upper note and a lower note. So for instance, if you chant the Rudram, Om Namo Bhagavate Rudraya. So that way you see that there's a little bit of, it's basically like how people talk in Trinidad, essentially. They sing, they don't speak. So, it's going up and down, it's going up and down in frequency. And so the Vedas have these three notes. So when you talk about music, have you heard of the Saptaswaras or the seven notes? Do, re, mi? You have the seven notes, right? So those are
Yes.
in our teachings. We also have the Saptaswaras, Sa Re Ga Ma Pa Dha Ni Sa. So these seven notes are, as history teaches us, they actually were first encoded in the Samaveda. So the Samaveda is the first um, historical body of knowledge that we are aware of, where all the seven notes were actually used in the form of chanting. And so basically it's sung. The Samaveda is not chanted. You call it Ganam. The other Vedas are called mantras. You must have heard of the word mantras, and that is referring to the Rig Veda, Rig mantra, Yajur mantra, and Atharva mantras. But the Sama Ganam, the Sama Veda is sung. It is not in the same form as the other Vedas. It contains all seven swaras, not just three swaras. So that is the uh, glory of the Sama Veda. In fact, as we'll encounter in the Gita later on, Krishna Bhagavan also explains He glorifies the Samaveda by saying, amongst the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. So it is just an extolling of the Samaveda. Um, all Vedas are equally divine, but here there's a special element of that musical tonality that's contained within the Samaveda, which is why it sounds a little pleasing to listen to as well. Of course, it's a mantra. At the end of the day, it is received by the rishis. It is not something that the rishis came up with, but nonetheless, it has a certain unique characteristic of containing all seven swaras. So I would encourage you, if you have a chance at some point, just go to YouTube and listen to Samaveda chanting. You'll see that it sounds different from the other Vedas because it's very sing-songy. And these other six disciplines that we speak about, um phonetics, grammar, rituals, etymology, prosody, Jyotisha, all of these things, they are essentially uh, required knowledge for a student in the Veda Pathshala. So, for instance, let's take Jyotisha. You need to know when a ritual should begin, right? There's an auspicious time to start. There's an auspicious muhurat. So you'll refer to the muhurat. You'll look at what day it is, what time it is, what place it is. All of these things you have to have an understanding of before you are able to perform a certain ritual. So that muhurat and all, it's not just muhurat, but I'm just giving an example. Muhurat, for instance, is found in the study of Jyotisha. But then you have chandas. So in the Gita, for instance, you have two chandas. I don't know the plural, chanda, chandasani. I don't know. I don't know what the plural of chandas is in Sanskrit, but you have two types of chandas in the Gita. You have Tishtub and Anushtum. Anushtum is the primary meter. So, it takes the form of 8 syllables. So, Dharma Kshetre Kuru Kshetre Samaveta Yujutsuvaha Mamaka Pandavashcheva Kima Kurvata Sanjaya. So, one verse broken out into four. Right? So, for instance, if you just go back up over here, you take this particular one is not in the Anushtup Chanda, but there are other shlokas here. So, for instance, go back. Mukam karoti vachalam 8. Pangum langayate girim. Okay, so this way you have 8. So, yat krupatamaham vande paramananda madhavam. So, this whole Anushtup Chanda is 32 syllables. And all of these different mantras can be chanted with this particular form, which is called Anushtup Chanda. And then, this is another Chanda. It looks very different. Yam Brahma Varunedra Rudra Maruta. No, in fact, I think it's Anus. Yam Brahma Varunedra Rudra Maruta Stunvanti Divyai Stavaihi Vedai Sagapadokramo Panishadai. Well, I think this is a little different, but I'll have to cross check. But it doesn't fit in the same meter because you see it's longer. I don't remember which chandas this is. But in the Vedas you have different chandas. So for instance, there's a Gayatri chanda also. Folks have heard of the Gayatri mantra. So it takes the form of uh, you heard that, no? Like something prachodaya. It usually ends that way. So different mantras are there. The one that we know of as the Gayatri mantra is actually the Savitur mantra, which is in worship of you depending on one's adhikara, you can look upon it as Surya Devata, you can look upon it as Hiranyagarbha, you can look upon it as Ishvara, or you can look upon it as a self as well. And so that is the Savitru mantra, which is the most famous mantra in the Gayatri meter. So just a little bit of I guess trivia over here. The Gayatri mantra is considered so auspicious, and because it is essentially the mantra that you initiate a person into the Vedas with. So when you initiate uh, a person, that you give them the Upanyanam, the samskara that's performed, the Upanyanam samskara, that is the time when one is initiated into the Gayatri mantra. And the Gayatri mantra makes one eligible to chant all of the other mantras in the Vedas, but the first mantra that you receive is the Gayatri mantra. And the Gayatri mantra is also very unique because it's contained in all four Vedas. Okay, so this is just something about chandas. And then you have etymology, like how you break down a certain word. Rituals, of course, you need to understand how rituals are performed. What is the right way to perform a ritual? Because all of the rituals that, not all, but well, a good majority of the rituals that we see, what you call yajnas, that with the fire offering, those are all found in the Vedas. And based on the rules that are set forth in the Vedas and the supporting limbs of the Vedas, which are called the Vedangas, not Vedanta, Vedangas. Anga means limb. So the limbs of the Vedas are the supporting limbs which carry the body of the Vedas. So one needs to understand how a ritual is performed as well. You need to understand grammar because, again, it helps in knowing how a mantra is formulated and how to read it and how to break it down and how to interpret it and such, as well as phonetics, the science of sound essentially. So these are the different limbs of the Vedangas that one is initiated into, is taught prior to a full blown teaching of the Vedas, and this is what is taught at a Ved Pathshala when you enroll at a very young age. Any questions here before we proceed? Okay, if you like to continue reading.
Praised by contemplative people. Then there are the contemplative people who meditate upon the truth of Ishvara, whom they see very clearly. How do they see? With their minds? What kind of mind? A mind that is in a state of contemplation, a mind that is absorbed, tranquil, and subtle. These people contemplate again and again, with minds that are awake to the true nature of the Lord, which they have come to appreciate through listening to and analyzing the Ishvara, the teaching.
It's okay.
Praised by
Just want to make sure there's everything's covered here. Yeah.
praised by others. They are people who praise the Lord as one with a form and attributes. The whole creation, with all of its glories, is nothing but the Lord's form. There are others, yogis, who see the Lord as formless, whose nature is not known by either gods or demons. Even though these gods are all exalted beings, they do not necessarily know that they are limitless. Being a god or a celestial does not mean that the person is enlightened. Self knowledge is not something that comes with an exalted position. They must have a means of knowledge, a pramana, to know the truth about themselves. Thus salutations are offered to the Lord, who is praised by the gods and demons alike. The demons also praise the Lord to gain various powers by his grace, and by the singers of the Sam Veda, whom the contemplative people realize in their meditations, and whose glories even gods and demons know not. Thus, these 9 verses praise the Gita in general. First, the, Maha, the Mahabharata, in which the Gita is placed, is praised. Then Lord Krishna is praised as a boatman because of whose tact and grace the Pandavas were able to cross the great river of battle with all of its hurdles. The Gita herself is also praised, after which Ved Vyasa, the chronic, the chronic, the chronicler of the Mahabharata, is praised because of whose grace we now have the Gita. Arjuna is recognized in these verses as being its nimitta, cause. Without him, there would be no Gita. Because Arjuna asked for it, we have the Lord's sung Bhagavad Gita. As we know, life as we know it, that is samsara, is considered to be a river of battle, R-
Rananandi.
Ranan,
Rananandi.
Rananandi, in which people drown. The verses do not tell us how this river can be crossed, nor do they mention Krishna's grace. We simply need to understand that the boatman is Krishna the Lord. Krishna is the one whose grace enables us to cross. Having invoked the Lord's help by this prayer to the Gita, we can now commence our study. Before we begin the first chapter, we will see briefly the context in which the Gita is set and its purpose.
Okay, so Dhyana shlokas are done finally. Okay, so we, at least if nothing else, we can see we've finished the Dhyana shlokas completely. And now we enter the context of the Gita. Any questions on the previous section as we continue? All good? Okay. So then, if you can continue reading.
The context of the Gita. A large scale battle between two factions of the royal clan of the Kurus in the days of Krishna provided the context for the Bhagavad Gita. The people belonging to this Kuru clan were called Kauravas. The battle was waged between the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, collectively referred to as Dhritarashtras, the five sons of Pandu,
Dhartarashtras.
sorry, Dhritarashtras,
Mm.
the five sons of Pandu, called the Pandavas. The entire Mahabharata, in which the Gita is placed, is a piece of literature drama. Thus, the author, Vyasa, had the freedom to use his imagination creatively. He did this by weaving the whole tapestry of this huge epic around a few historical events and characters.
So yeah, just to give an additional emphasis, the Mahabharata, similar to the Ramayana, is an itihasa. Itihasa means history. Okay, but history is also largely conditioned by the one who has chronicled that history. Because there's no such thing as an objective history. History is always seen through somebody's lens. I want to make this supremely clear. There's no such thing as an objective truth in reality, because everything that one knows, one perceives, except for Brahma Vidya, everything that one knows and one perceives is colored by one's lens. Okay, so this is to be noted. So when it comes to the Mahabharata, one has to recognize that it is written by Ved Vyasa based on the events which were seen by Ved Vyasa. Now, this is not to say that what Ved Vyasa wrote was subjective or it was colored or it was distorted. No, that is not what I'm trying to say. All I'm trying to say is that there is no such thing as an objective history, because history is seen through somebody's lens, including Ishvara's lens. What Ishvara sees is reality as it occurs, similar to Ved Vyasa. So, what I see, somebody saying, somebody doing something, whatever it may be, I may interpret it in a different fashion. I may feel slighted by a statement somebody made. I may feel my ego has been pricked, and then I may interpret it in a negative light. It's possible. But when it comes to an objective person, there can be objective people, but there aren't objective truths, because there's no such thing as a categorical truth in this mithya jagat. There's no such thing as a categorical truth. Everything is from a certain vantage point. For example, suppose I'm standing here and I see one person attacking from the left, person attacking to the right. Okay, he's trying to strike the guy on the right with a sword. That's my vantage point. I have recorded it exactly as I saw it. But if I stood on the other side of those people, then the guy on my left will now be on my right. You see? So everything is a vantage point at the end of the day. That's what I mean when I say that there is no such thing as an objective fact in life. There's no objective fact. That being said, this itihasa is composed by one of the most objective people that you can encounter, a great Mahatma Rishi Vedvyasa. This history that was seen by Vedvyasa was conveyed in the form of a poem. And there are certain liberties that every poet will take in order to enrich that work of uh, history and elevate it into a work of art. So there are certain liberties that will be taken, and that is also the case with Ramayana. It is also the case with Mahabharata. It does not change the events. It does not change the content. It does not change the teaching at all. But understand that, for instance, if you have something like, what is this called? The battle was waged between 100 sons of the Dhritarashtra. Technically, it's not possible to have 100 children in one's lifetime. Biological children. Okay, you can adopt as many as you want, but biologically, I don't think, like Nikita, you'll have 100 kids, even if you try. It's not possible. Even if you have triplets, you'll still need to have kids 33 years in a row, which is also not possible. Every single year, if you have triplets, you'll still have 99 kids after 33 years. So, okay. So understand that these are poetic exaggerations to make a certain point, but don't take everything as literal fact, because if you do, your kids will question it. That's the problem. You might not question it because we are sort of used to accepting things based on a certain background that we have. But if my child asks me that, hey, did this guy really have 100 sons? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. Probably not. It's an exaggeration. And Puju Swamiji has explained this himself, where he talked about Ravana's 10 heads. He's like, nobody has 10 heads. That's very imbalanced. The 10 heads were conflicted personalities of Ravana. 10 different personalities that were all inhabiting one single mind. And, it's like a split personality, multiple personality disorder of sorts. So, yeah, we can continue. Um, can you see or
Yeah.
okay?
Just-
1 second. Sorry, I
You
need
have
to
to
scroll
scroll
up.
back.
Yeah. Yep.
The Kauravas. When Dhritarashtra and Pandu, the sons of Vichitravira, came of age, Bhishma had to install one of them as the king to rule the Kauravas. Although Dhritarashtra was older than Pandu, he was not eligible to rule because he was blind. According to the Dharma Shastra, which states exactly who can and cannot rule, ruling a kingdom being a very responsible and difficult job, a king should have all his faculties intact. Pandu therefore became the ruler. Pandu was a great man and he ruled well. He respected his older brother Dhritarashtra and gave him the full status of a king, even though he could not actually rule. Pandu went on went on a dig digvijaya
Vijay.
digvijaya, going in all the directions and conquering the rulers of various kingdoms and bringing them under one's subjugation, and brought in wealth and prosperity to the kingdom. He also extended the frontiers of his kingdom. Once Pandu decided to go to the
I
forest
just want to
along.
pause a little bit because a little bit of context might be needed about this Digvijaya and other things. So, to be a good ruler, you need to have a centralized form of government. You can't have a very, well, some decentralization is good. You need to have a balance, of course. You can't, if you're too centralized, you're essentially a dictatorship or a, communist party of sorts. If you're extremely decentralized, then the extreme form of decentralization, if on the one hand you have dictatorship, then on the other hand you will have anarchy. So you need to have a little bit of a balance between order and chaos, because chaos can also be brought into order. But when I say order, I don't mean order in a good sense. I mean rigidity and chaos. Like those are the two dynamics I'm trying to oppose over here or juxtapose. And it is order which brings about the confluence of rigidity and chaos. And you kind of like come up with a complex hierarchy or a system of sorts. So, you know, Bharat, as people have often stated, and there is truth to it, was a land of multiple kingdoms. It wasn't just one single centralized ruler, but you had many fiefdoms and you had kingdoms and you had princely states and whatnot. And this happened all the way up to the Mughal era and the British rule as well. There were many disjointed factions within the country, different ruling states and such. But if you want the nation to function as a whole, you needed to have them all unite to a certain emperor or Chakravarti, as it was called back then. And that emperor is the king of kings, if that makes sense. Okay, so Pandu, who was the father of the Pandavas, also went about trying to fulfill this duty, which is this conquering wasn't similar to this Genghis Khan or Alexander the Not So Great or some of the other conquerors that you think about in the modern or the historical era as well. In the conquests that we've been exposed to through history, most of the conquests are for fame, glory, prosperity, just all of those things. But for us, the expansion of a kingdom, provided that it is ruled by a dharmic king, is actually a great act of dharma. Because what you're doing is you're uniting the nation under an able leadership. It's kind of like, I think of it in corporate terms as mergers and acquisitions, essentially. That's what you're doing. You're making your company stronger by making everybody else who you've acquired also stronger and everybody is rewarded as a result. So um, nobody's kingdom is destroyed. People aren't pillaged. Their lands are not pillaged. People aren't left impoverished. But everybody is taken care of. Everybody's brought along for the ride. Everybody's part of the grand story, and that's what this expansion was supposed to be about. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. Uh, any questions before we continue? Okay, you can continue.
Once Pandu decided to go to the forest along with his wives, Kunti and Madri, and a huge retinue to hunt and enjoy the life of living in the forest. There, once he came across a pair of deer which were sporting together. Without thinking, he shot arrows at them and mortally wounded them. In that instant, the pair of deer took on their original forms of a rishi, right?
Rishi.
Rishi and his wife. They had assumed the form of deer and were coveting freely. Then the rishi by the name Kindama cursed Pandu that if ever he would unite with his wife, he would die instantaneously and hence would never be able to beget children. After this, Pandu renounced his kingdom and took to an ascetic way of life in the forest along with his wives. He observed many kinds of austerities, and his wives Kunti and Madri also practiced the austerities along with him. Thus, all three of them lived a life befitting the Vanaprastha,
Vanaprastha
Vanaprastha,
ashrama.
Vanaprastha.
Remember the four ashramas: sannyas ashrama, brahmacharyam, grihastha ashrama, vanaprastha, all of that. So that's vanaprastha. The third one. I just want to point out this is when you see the story of Ramayana. There's a similar incident with King Dashrath, who's mistakenly he's mistakenly shot this person called Shravan Kumar, and he thought it's a deer. So I guess the moral of the story is like stop hunting deer. Like poor thing, let them be. Just don't do that because you'll always get in trouble. So I don't know if it's meant to be sort of discouraging advice. Given that both the grand epics really start with both the father figures Pandu and Dashratha getting into some serious trouble and ultimately leading to their death because of a deer, hunting a deer or hunting in general. Ram Bhagwan gets in trouble, right? Chasing after the deer. So I think there's a sort of a message over there of I don't know, but it's very interesting because in the case of Ramayana, the deer indirectly led to the death of Dashratha because he shot Shravan Kumar. His parents cursed him, and then they also died, I believe. And the curse was, just as we have been parted from our son, one day you also will be parted from your son. And that's what happens when Rama leaves Ayodhya. Dasharatha essentially dies of heartbreak, right? When his son leaves, like he is so crestfallen and he can't continue to live life. So he dies because of that. And in this case, as we'll see ahead, like Pandu also dies as a result of this curse. So curses from ascetics are to be taken very seriously. Yeah, continue, please. Oops.
The fact that he could not beget any children was a source of great sorrow to Pandu. His wife Kunti had been given a mantra as a boon by the sage Durvasa once when she had served him very well. This mantra had the power to bring any god to her and bless her with a son. Therefore, at Pandu's behest, she gave birth to three sons, Dharmaputra, Bhima, and Arjuna, using the mantra. She also helped Madri to beget the twins Nakula and Sahadev, using the mantra. Later, being unable to resist the temptation, when Pandu tried to approach Madri, the rishi's curse took effect and he died. Because she had been instrumental in causing Pandu to die, Madri put an end to her life by committing sati. after entrusting her two sons to the care of Kunti. After this, the rishis in the forest brought Kunti and the five sons of Pandu to Hastinapura and entrusted them to the care of the elders of the Kuru clan. The entire Kuru clan accepted the five brothers as the rightful heirs of Pandu. Bhishma entrusted to Dronacharya the task of education and training in archery and warfare of all the princes, the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra and the five sons of Pandu. After their education was completed, they all demonstrated their skills in public during their graduation ceremony. Then, by the unanimous decision of all the elders, Dharmaputra, the oldest of the Pandavas, was installed as the crown prince and was entrusted with with the responsibility of ruling the kingdom.
Any questions here? That I see a couple of intertwined threads, but I'll see if someone has questions. Okay, so I'll make a few quick comments. Okay. Um, this thing always intrigued me because as we spoke about earlier, this part about the mantras giving rise to progeny. Um, when we read an itihasa or you read a Purana, the content of that is essentially the teaching. There's a certain encoded message that one, you know, looks beyond the literal and tries to figure out like what it is that is being communicated over here. But there's a certain danger in doing that. And the reason I call it dangerous is because if, first of all, who is to draw the line between figurative and literal? Who has the authority? That's point one. Point two is depending on one's personality, one may be, if a person is hyper rational, and when I say hyper rational, I don't mean it in a good way. I'm sort of using it as a negative. If you are hyper rational, you don't see the beauty and the magic and mystery of life. You kind of look at things in a very mechanical cause effect relationship, in a very logical way. Like you're a hard coded computer with certain algorithms in your mind, and that's how you basically look at the world. That's also a problem. But then on the other end, you also have these folks who accept everything without, I don't say without raising doubts, but rather without asking questions. There's a difference between questioning what is taught, okay, oh, I don't believe all of this is true, and asking questions to understand. We encourage asking questions to understand and trying to find the question that exists in the reading, because usually, when I get on this explanation sort of approach, it is usually born of a question that I will ask to myself that I see in the passage. So that's kind of like how the approach is born. So, when you think about this mantra, the mantra had the power to bring any god to her and bless her with a son. So then, how do you decide how to interpret this? Right? The first approach here is to really understand what the acharya, how the acharya unfolds it through a commentary, whether it's in the form of a pravachan or a commentary that they've written. So, such as, let's say if Pujya Swamiji is teaching the Ramayana, I this was his interpretation about 10 heads of Ravana, not mine. He said that, yeah, it's probably, the multiple personalities of Ravana doesn't really represent 10 physical heads. So, listening to an acharya and taking their inputs on how literally or figuratively to take a certain um, passage is very important. But what do you do in instances when the acharya may not have commented on a certain thing? Well, you make a note of it and you ask the acharya. That's point two. But suppose you want to try it on your own. I don't recommend this to everybody because it's a dangerous game that one starts to play then, right? What is fictional, what is literal. But I thought about this part a lot, like myself in my own head. Not a lot, but as we read this, and earlier I've given this a thought as well. When you think about the birth of life on planet Earth, one second, I'll stop sharing the screen for a moment. When you think about the birth of well, the dawn of life, when the first life really emerged from, as we sort of have been taught, from the swamps, from the oceans. That's where the first life evolved, the unicellular beings. It's very easy to explain life and the process of evolution once you have that first form of life that's already out there. What we don't have an answer to is the very origin of life itself. How did the first DNA molecule synthesize itself? Once you have DNA, sure, you can have replication after that. You have different forms of replication. You'll have, you know, different processes of progeny, like in plants, in several plants, not all plants, and in several plants and in all animals, you'll have sex as a form of progeny. In some other creatures such as fungi, you'll have like this, spores which are sent out, mushrooms, right? Mushroom spores, and sometimes it gets you allergic as well. Or plants also have spores. You have different ways in which life reproduces. What's not clear is how the very first form of life was formed for the rest to reproduce thereafter. There's no answer to that. There have been experiments that scientists have performed over the ages. I forget the name of the one of the experiments, but they tried to recreate the old conditions, the prehistorical conditions of life on planet Earth, or in fact pre-life, prehistorical conditions of planet Earth in its initial first few, millions of years of its formation. So the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, I believe, and as per estimates, life originated about 3 billion years ago. So what happened between that first 1.5 billion years to the I guess, and then the next 3 billion years that we see, that is a mystery to people. Okay. And what they tried to do is they created this initial soup, because in the Earth's atmosphere there was no oxygen before. It was just very toxic. There was sulfur dioxide from volcanoes, and it was just a hot, hellish planet at first before things cooled down. And so they try to recreate a lot of these environments. They try to mix some of the amino acids and the different kinds of proteins and whatnot, but they couldn't, accidentally form the first molecular structure that you call the DNA. They couldn't form that. It's been tried endless number of times by different scientists across the world. So it's still a mystery as to how the first DNA was synthesized. There's something called God of the gaps. That's not what we are trying to do over here. The God of the gaps is basically saying, when you don't understand a certain cause effect relationship, when you don't understand a certain process, where there's a gap in the process, it is a very lazy thing to do to introduce God in that gap. That, oh, I don't do it, and therefore Ishvara must have done it. Okay. That's a very lazy approach, and I agree with that. It's a very lazy thing to do because one wants to understand what that process was. But no matter how much I think about it, when you look at it in terms of permutations and combinations, the chances of the first DNA to have synthesized by itself is so enormously low that it would not be unreasonable to project some divine intervention over there. That's what I think. Just based on the computational impossibilities involved over there. Not impossibilities, but improbabilities, because it's all improbable, not impossible. Impossible means probability of zero. We can't say that for sure. But it's a very small number. That out of this whole messy soup of, compounds, suddenly you had such an elaborate structure that was capable of reproducing itself. Very, very low probability. Now, what we can hypothesize, and this is a hypothesis. I'm not saying this is said by a guru or it's taught in the Shastra. No, it's my hypothesis. There was some intervention involved somewhere. Life was spawned, the initial life was spawned somehow for the rest to continue thereafter. And it could be the different, forces of nature that we talked about in the form of the Devas, who constructed this sort of initial, I guess, gooey soup kind of thing where life could originate, or even the very molecular structure of it, and then allowed it to go thereafter, right? Because it's possible. What this particular passage in the Mahabharata also states is that through the blessings of the Devas, Kunti was able to procreate and give birth to the Pandavas. But I take it sort of in this sense, which is that ultimately when you talk about fertilizing the egg, what leads to that fertilization? You basically have the sperm and you have the egg, and then when they combine together, you have something called a zygote. And that is the embryo, essentially. And that the embryonic cell is formed and then that multiplies and so on and so forth. But all it really is from, I'm not talking from an adhyatmic standpoint or from a Sukshma Sharira standpoint, because that's more important, the Sukshma Sharira and other things, because life actually forms around the Sukshma Sharira. It is not that somehow you have a physical thing that is there and then suddenly life enters into it. That's the conception that we typically have in our heads, right? That, oh, a baby is born and then suddenly life enters a baby. That's stupid. I won't call it stupid, but it's not a very thoughtful understanding of the way life evolves. What we say in our Shastras is that it is the prarabdha karma of a certain jiva to be born into the womb of a person. Okay. And that jiva, in its unmanifest or potential state, is carried through the sperm which fertilizes the egg. And that is where the jivatvam basically becomes an embodied state, and then you call it an embryo. The embryo and all of the cellular multiplications happen around the Sukshma Sharira that is already the basis of the Jiva. Does that make sense? The Sthula Sharira is formed around the Sukshma Sharira. It is not that the Sthula Sharira is present and the Sukshma Sharira enters it from the outside. It is the Sthula encapsulates the Sukshma Sharira, and kind of like the Sukshma Sharira expresses through the Sthula Sharira. That's how I make sense of it personally. It's a model. But now, when you talk about this kind of fertilization or first form of life or whatever, what is it really? Now, just in purely biochemical terms, it is it is chemistry that is playing out, which is forming a higher order structure which you call biology. It's physics playing out as chemistry, which is playing out as biology. That's what it is. And then ultimately, that's what you call an organism. When biology takes a certain level of complexity, now you see that this is an organism. It could be a simple organism like a unicellular being, or it could be a complex organism like you wonderful people here. So this life, when we talk about the conceiving a child in the context of Kunti or Madri, or in some of the other ancient examples that we have, what does it mean to say that they begot children without a certain act involved on the part of Pandu or anybody else? I think it is the blessings in the form of the arrangement of whatever structures that are required in order for conception to take place by the blessings of the Devtas, because they are capable, they are present in the form of the natural order. And if they can impact the order of the cosmos, they can also impact the order of the body. That's how I see it. And that's how I also believe the very first form of life was somehow there was an intervention that was involved. Because let's analyze this a little further and why it's important and why I'm sort of harping on it, right? Suppose we say Suppose we say that life was only a matter of probabilities. It's a chance occurring, which is that, okay, maybe Ishvara laid, as per the cosmic laws, the order of the cosmos, laid it out in such a fashion, tailored in such a way that life had to ultimately have evolved at some point. Let's say all of the raw ingredients were there. You have a kitchen with all of the ingredients, but somehow it was just right and mixed in the right order so that you can have a delicious broth that emerges from it. That's one possibility. The problem with that particular approach is that because it leaves life to a certain probabilistic event, you cannot assign probability as a fact. What you can call a fact is the fact that you have a karma. You have a prarabdha karma. That is a fact. You have a sanchita karma as a fact. There is an agami karma as a fact. There is a jiva that is born to experience the fruits of the prarabdha is a fact. These are facts of life. The prarabdha karma involves both punya and papa karma, which have to be exhausted through the lived experiences of the jiva, is a fact. Now, if all of these facts are there, how can one leave the very origin of life of the entire cosmos up to a mere probabilistic event which may or may not happen? And that is where the mind starts to play tricks, because as you analyze these things and you talk about free will, determinism, chaos, order, complexity, blah, 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 then you begin to see that the handiwork of Ishvara ensured somehow, and what that process was, how that process was, I have no idea. I'm too stupid to understand these things. We don't know. But there has to be a teleological order that guaranteed that life would be born in this cosmos, because this cosmos is the playground for life to experience its pap and punya karma phalas. That's what it is. And that is why I don't believe that life and its origin was left up to chance. There has to be some teleological order, some intervention that took place at the very start, perhaps, of the origin of life, or perhaps even before that. I don't know. Those are some contemplations I have. Any thoughts here? I know it's not completely related to this, but it sort of is. Okay. So I think we've almost completed an hour, close to it, 50 to 53 minutes. But I did want to talk about this, which is that, as you give more thought to Shastra, at first, there are no contradictions at first. And the reason is that one has not given enough thought to it. A contradiction is only a contradiction when one has thought about it as a contradiction. Then, as one understands a little bit, you start seeing a lot of contradictions because you're asking questions. It's very important to ask questions, because if these questions are not looked into, what ends up happening is if somebody else asks you these questions, it's going to shake you out of your comfort zone, and then you'll start doubting the efficacy and the very validity of the Shastras. So it is important to ask questions to oneself before somebody else raises them in a way that might make us lose Shraddha. And then the third point, or the third stage that really occurs, is that the contradictions get resolved. And the contradictions get resolved when one gives the benefit of the doubt to the Shastras, that the Shastras know something that I do not. The Rishis knew something of value that I am willing to learn myself. I'm willing to look upon it with an open mind, to see it not as I want it to be, but the way it is, the way the Rishis have conveyed. So, with that openness of mind, what ends up happening is that I gain a certain capacity to reconcile the seeming contradictions. Okay, if they are real contradictions, they cannot be reconciled. If they are seeming contradictions, then they can be reconciled because it was based on a certain loose thread in my own understanding that had to be placed in the correct order. So that's how that Shraddha helps with reconciling some of these questions, because I would say, as one study of Shastra grows and as one starts contemplating about life in general, you start seeing all of these things. That, okay, is there such a thing as free will? Is there such a thing as determinism? If there is free will and if there's determinism, how do these two speak to one another? How do they connect to each other when they are contradictory ideas? And then you explore that, you think about it in terms of prarabdha karma, and this karma, that karma, agami karma, and you begin to see that, okay, there was no contradiction to begin with. It was just me looking at it from a certain vantage point. I looked at the same thing from two different vantage points. I called it two different things. I called it free will and I called it determinism. But I take 2 or 3 steps back and I begin to see that they are one and the same. And the way I can explain that is, imagine you have a fish tank. And in that fish tank, you've placed 3 cameras. Okay. One camera is here, the second camera is here, and the third camera is here. So now there's a fish moving about. The first camera will see the fish coming towards it. The camera on top will see the fish kind of like going this way, from top. And this camera will see the fish kind of like going in the opposite direction. And each of the cameras will disagree with each other based on their respective recordings, because the fish is moving in all different directions which cannot be reconciled. But when you take a step away from the fish tank and you look at the 3 cameras, you start seeing that there were 3 different vantage points, but there was only that one fish. And that's when those 3 vantage points of the cameras actually become, rather than a contradiction, they become a glory. They become a glory because you have 3 different ways to look at the same thing now. But it was the same thing, it was the same phenomena observed in 3 different ways. That's beautiful, right? So that's what the study of the Shastra is supposed to reveal as one gets deeper and deeper. Because, my God, like Brahma Vidya, when you get to that, my goodness, the glory of Satchitananda, it's just immensely, immensely gratifying. I can't think of anything else in life that is as profound as the knowledge of the self. And when you begin to look upon it in different angles, because you have to start that way. You'll talk about the pot and clay example, you'll talk about the ocean and wave example, the mirror example, this example, that example. And it all appears like, oh my goodness, there are all these different cameras placed upon the self. But what is the self? Because all of these are painting a different picture, but they're not. Because you take a step back from all of these models, you begin to see the self in its full glory. That is what Vedanta teaches. So I would really encourage a lot of contemplation on these subject matters. Okay. All right. Anything here before we close? Questions, comments? Okay. So we'll meet next week. Uh, what date is it? It's not November 3rd. Okay. So next week will be at the same time, but whoever is, I guess, impacted by daylight savings or the lack of it, we'll start meeting at 8:30 after November 3rd. So next week is a regular time, 9:30 Eastern time. The week after that will be at 8:30 Eastern time. Same time for Nikita, I think. Everybody else will be impacted. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Stop the recording.